Aren't you glad the so-called fairness doctrine doesn't apply here?
You're listening to Rebooting Liberty Radio Network. Compelling and entertaining talk.
Don't touch that dial.
Attention, patriots, freethinkers, truth seekers. You are listening to Agents of Information, broadcasting worldwide on the Rebooting Liberty Radio Network.
It is the most corrupt, degenerate, criminal government in American history.
And I'm sorry to say that the most brazen untruths always come from the left. Just like most of the major plagiarism scandals come from the left, because they believe in narrative over fact.
The Second Amendment of our Bill of Rights is my concealed weapons permit. Period.
Anyone that's willing to stand next to me to fight the progressive left, I will be in that bunker.
The answer to 1984 is 1776.
If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
War.
Welcome, Patriots. You're tuned in to the Agents of Information, the newest show on the Rebooting Liberty Radio Network. This is our inaugural episode. You can find us at live.rebootingliberty.com, and we are also streaming on TuneIn Radio. Thank you for listening. We are embarking on a mission to uncover facts and narratives that are ignored or spun by the government media complex. My name is Jared Day, and co-host Dan Lyman is on board and ready. Welcome, Dan.
How you doing, Jared?
Great. Glad
Excellent. Really excited to kick this podcast off. It's our first episode. And, like Jared said, we're going to be focusing on exposing media spin, media bias. We're going to be covering current events and offering our insight into the goings-on of the world of national and geopolitics and culture.
Yes. So you were, we were talking earlier about the death threats on Trump.
Yeah. What's interesting is that Donald Trump really seems to have drawn out the lunacy of the left and really exposed them for the quite violent people that they can be. So we have something that developed at the end of last week, and there was a quick resolution thanks to a lot of action by the alternative media. And then eventually it went pretty mainstream with talk radio hosts and the Drudge Report even covering it. So there's a guy in Colorado Springs. He is a board member of the Colorado ACLU. And he put up some pretty aggressive Facebook posts, the most notable of which read, and I quote, "The thing is, we really have to reach out to those who might consider voting for Trump and say, this is Goebbels. This is the final solution. If you're voting for him, I will have to shoot you before Election Day. They're not going to listen to reason, so when justice is gone, there's always force." Now, this comes just a couple days after Attorney General Loretta Lynch had put us all on notice that she would be aggressively going after people whose anti-Muslim rhetoric edges towards violence. And that caused an uproar, of course, because clearly she's ready to trample on the First Amendment. But no comment from her on death threats on Trump. So I find that to be a double standard right off the bat there. And then also you have Rick Ross, the gangster rapper, rapping about assassinating Trump in his most recent new song, which also haven't heard anything about any legal ramifications for that. So Trump seems to really have brought out the crazies.
Yeah, and typically you just don't see a lot of on the right of death threats. I don't see it. I don't see it on social media. I don't hear people talking about it. But it is very common with the left when they are furious with someone, they will threaten to kill them, and they get away with it on social media or anywhere. It's a total double standard.
Yeah, it's funny. The left is always they're always quick to tie fascism to the right wing, when in reality it really roots in the left wing, the totalitarian left, and they're quite notorious for their threats of violence and actually carrying it out throughout most of the 20th century. We've seen all sorts of different left wing governments that killed upwards of about 250 million people or more.
Yeah, the coincidence, and something in common with all of those is before that happened, they disarmed the populace, and that's
yep. They need a clear path to the after disarming, and then they can start loading people into the trains, right?
Or wherever it may be.
Exactly. So yeah, like I was saying, that this situation with Trump, he's really really brought out some intense backlash, which is something that the left is always so concerned about, is backlash, against Muslims or the LGBT community. But when it comes to backlash against, let's say, working class Americans, they have no problem with that.
No. And Trump made those comments. Whenever Trump makes something that goes against the unwritten laws that we have with political correctness, he ends up going up in the polls. Like, even last week when he talked about banning Muslims from coming in, except for soldiers returning from the battlefield, everybody thought he was done. Even Michael Savage said he may be done. And Savage is a Trump supporter. He wasn't. It kind of worked in his favor, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he's speaking what many Americans are thinking. There is a concern about what's coming in this Trojan horse. There's a concern about the vetting process. You have, the FBI, James Comey, the head of the FBI, has admitted that they are unequipped to screen even 10,000 Syrian refugees. And we all know that 10,000 was the first number that they threw out at us, and they've since increased that to 200,000 or more over the next 2 years. And they've already, let in and issued visas to refugees from predominantly Muslim countries to the tune of 680,000 over the last 5 years. So if they can't handle 10,000, I can't imagine how they've handled or would handle somewhere in the ballpark of about 1 million just over the course of 5 to 7 years.
It's complete chaos. John Nolte, a Breitbart piece, he laid out some inconvenient facts about Islam, and a lot of these kind of give Trump some support. I mean, give some legitimacy to what he said, despite the reaction from the establishment and the left. American Muslims are 5,000% more likely to commit a terror attack. ISIS is already everywhere in the United States, and we knew that. 51% of American Muslims back some form of Sharia. A quarter of American Muslims are comfortable with violence. A disturbing percentages of the world's Muslims support ISIS, like we in France. Disturbing percentages of the world's Muslims support suicide bombings. Only 81% of American Muslims agree that violence against civilians is never justified. 81%. Disturbing percentages of the world's Muslims back Sharia law. America admits thousands of immigrants from countries where Muslims favor Sharia. Now, when you get some of that in your face, you think, first of all, the states, individual states, better get on their horse about passing some legislation to preemptively block Sharia law, because it snuck up on Great Britain and it's now part of their legal system. So that's one thing. Those are some disturbing numbers, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think that what Americans really need to learn to do is to look to Europe for what's coming down the pike, because Europe, it tends to be, let's say, 5 to 10 years ahead of what eventually comes to America in many regards. And we're always just playing catch up with them. And if you look at what's happening in Europe, in some of these really small towns in Germany, Greece, Italy, Sweden, the United Kingdom, Belgium, France, there are some huge issues over there. They have no-go zones in France and in the UK and Sweden. You have cities like Malmo and Stockholm experiencing large amounts of violence that can be attributed directly to third world Islamic refugees or migrants that end up in their countries. And you have Sweden is now considered the rape capital of the West in terms of the actual rate. They've gone up 1,400% in the last couple of decades since they started admitting large waves of migrants from other countries that really have no interest in assimilating. All they want are the freebies and all the things that are offered by first world European culture.
Yeah, and not only that, they want to force. They've got a few things going. They've got, many of them, jihad. Then they have the immigration jihad. It's part of their doctrine to not even infiltrate, but basically invade a country. And this Trojan horse it's a joke. They must be laughing. It defies all common sense that we do what Europe does. After seeing how it fails, then we do it. It defies all common sense. It's like they want to fail purposely. Right.
Yeah, there are already enclaves in the United States that are essentially no-go zones, the most notorious of which is Dearborn, also known as Dearbornistan in Michigan. You have jihadi training camps, basically. Islamburg, New York would be one of them. They're all over the place, and that's not something that should exist on American soil. It's just dangerous. And
it's something that the media should be spotlighting, but they never talk about it.
No, there was InfoWars they dig deep into these sort of issues. They sent out one of their military veteran reporters on kind of a dangerous mission with a couple cameramen to investigate some of these camps like Islamburg, and he did a kind of a covert report from outside the boundaries of that camp, and immediately the next day, the InfoWars crew or their lawyers were getting calls from U.S. intelligence wondering why they were trespassing at these camps. I can't imagine how the press gets in trouble for trying to investigate a jihadist camp on American soil, but nothing. There are no ramifications for that actual camp.
There has to be more to it that we don't know. There's something in between. There's some sort of buffer in there.
Sure, something very sinister.
Yeah. So, as far as the fixing this problem, which is completely out of control, and it has been for a long time, and it's just getting worse, I think that Trump and Cruz are the only two presidents that would take serious action toward it. And we were just talking about Trump, but as far as Cruz goes, it was interesting to finally see some back and forth between Cruz and Trump, and I was surprised at Trump. What Rush Limbaugh said, he acted like Donald McCain. I thought it was funny. He did. He knows Cruz is a threat, and he's no longer Did you see when he played that song Maniac?
Yeah.
That was hilarious. And what did he say? I was surprised, but didn't you write something about Cruz in the past couple days at Western Free Press?
Yeah, so I've been a big Ted Cruz fan for a few years now, pretty much since he came on the scene. I think that, in general, his record is fantastic. I think that he has shown to be a steel-spined conservative, and really, a conservative in the true sense of the word, not the more mainstream conservative. The media, something they're very good at is changing language, spinning language, and they've even done that to the term conservative, and now somehow someone like George W. Bush is called a conservative. And not that I really feel like the terminology or the label is particularly important. I think it's more about the ideas and the track record, but at the same time, there is a bit of, it offers some insight into how the person's thinking. So, with that being said, Ted is finally a front runner in this race, and with a Trump, Cruz, and Carson being the tri-pronged spearhead at this point of the GOP group, I think that's a total nightmare for the establishment. They've done everything that they can to prevent this from happening, and all of their guys are starting to lag behind, with the exception of Rubio, and we'll give it some time for him to start lagging if he doesn't really pick up his popularity. But what's important is to not take any of these guys at face value, and to really look behind the curtain and try to find out as much as we can about them. Donald Trump has been in the limelight for decades now. It's fairly easy to get a grasp on where he's come from and where he is. But Ted is he's a new face, and despite his excellent record, there are things to be slightly concerned about. At minimum, some folks would take that a little further. But I've peeled back the skin on Cruz a bit and found some things that could certainly be of concern. Most notably are his direct connections to the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a hard left globalist agenda group that pumps out all sorts of people that end up in government or in high places of prestige that have a lot of influence at, say, Goldman Sachs or large organizations that play a big role in policy and this crony corporatist kind of global government that they're going for. So Ted's wife, Heidi Cruz, was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She served on a task force that put out a report that basically advanced the North American Union agenda. She says that she was there just purely for economic advice. So if we take her at her word, maybe it's not the worst thing ever, but you never know with these sort of situations. And then she also was a vice president at Goldman Sachs, who arguably may even have more clout on the global scene than the Council on Foreign Relations itself. They certainly work hand in hand. The Goldman Sachs is a founding corporate membership of the CFR. So that's one thing to be worried about. Another thing is Cruz has surrounded himself on the campaign with neocons, known neocons. You have Elliot Abrams. He's a notorious neocon and also a high-ranking member of the CFR. And then he's also got Chad Sweet, his campaign chairman, Victoria Coates as his national security advisor, James Woolsey, his foreign policy advisor, and John Bolton, his foreign policy advisor. I think that's something Americans should be concerned about. If they're not, is our foreign policy. One of the reasons that the rise of terrorism and jihad has been precipitated is a part of our foreign policy, and we are constantly at war. We're constantly sending men and women out there to sacrifice their bodies in the meat grinder for what many would wonder if, should we really be spreading democracy around the world, or should we be worrying about what's going on our soil first and deal with those things, first and our borders. So those are a couple things, and you probably know a few others you can throw in there.
Well, those were the two that I've heard, and I would like to hear him discuss that instead of the few times it's come up, he's deflected it and kind of avoided getting to the, actually giving us substantive answer to it. It's just spins it into another topic. He needs to stand up. He needs to tell everybody what the deal is with that, because that was my hang-up before I decided to support him, and it still is a big issue with me, despite supporting him. And I think that I'm hoping he may have to once there's less candidates. We get down to 4 or 5. That's going to come up, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. They're really going to start vetting these guys. Even our side. I mean, we're very careful about who we want to put our support into, and that's why in the past 2 elections you've seen the voter turnout for the GOP dropping, because the establishment has been putting forth candidates that we would never support, and just kind of driven us away from the polls in many ways. And 2 other quick little notes about Cruz that should be put forward is, one of them is he has a great extensive immigration policy on for his campaign platform. However, he's shown some weakness in that area, and one of them primarily would be the H-1B foreign worker visas, which he wanted to increase from 65,000 issued annually to 325,000.
That's a deal breaker for me.
Yeah, that's a problem. But what's interesting is he's caught a lot of flack for that, and since then, most recently, he's reformed that position, calling for a 6-month moratorium on H-1B visas. So I would imagine that sometimes he tests the waters on behalf of his, let's say, backers, financial backers, who all these billionaires that put money through these guys, they're all interested in open borders and cheaper labor. So these guys inevitably all get soft on immigration, and that's one of our biggest issues at this point.
Right. And if you follow the money with him a bit, it's pretty clear that he goes through, you come to Alec and then you go to Koch brothers, which, that's fine. But, Trump isn't getting money from anybody. So that's just a big plus for me. I'm not, in his camp, but that's a huge plus for a candidate not to be beholden to anybody.
Yeah, it's funny, and I think it's so indicative of what happens even to the best of candidates, is they get funded, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars eventually by the time they get to the actual election. And at that point, there's been so much money coming down the river, it gets allocated all over the place, and these guys are already mired in wasteful spending. And the interesting thing about Trump is that anytime that you see his campaign headquarters, when they do the little behind the scenes with the major news networks, you see that he has a bare bones operation. There is no fanfare. They're not wasting any money. Trump is running it, like you said, off his own dime. He's running it like a private business rather than the public, wasteful spending entity. And I think that's a good sign for how he could potentially run the country with our money.
Right. I thought it was interesting. He doesn't drink. I mean, it doesn't matter, but I just pictured him. For a guy like him, I would just picture him to, he's a Vegas guy.
I think one of his best qualities is his seriousness about what he's doing, and I think that is a perfect example that this guy is really serious. I saw today he even just released his health report. He did a full checkup to basically, assure the American public that he's in good health, something that Hillary Clinton cannot do because she's not in good health. I have a friend who worked at a hospital in New York City, and she was there when Hillary Clinton was admitted very quietly, kind of a middle of the night clandestine thing, and they weren't allowed to really find out what was going on with her, but it did sound like a health crisis. And it's known that she has hypothyroidism, and she had that stroke apparently a couple years ago. Take it or leave it, whether she was telling the truth on that or not. She's hit her head. We've seen emails from Huma Abedin that says that she's confused a lot of the time. So it's a big contrast that Hillary Clinton is hiding behind all the secrecy, and Trump is totally comfortable with releasing, a medical report about himself, which is quite intimate.
Right. Now, so tomorrow night is the debate, and I just have some audio here from the last couple debates, just some highlights, really good stuff. But before that, we've got Trump, Carson and Cruz center stage, and who didn't make the cut is Graham, Santorum, Huckabee, and Pataki. Now, they just need to drop out. I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, it's getting to the point where if you've got 0.5%, there's just, what are you doing,
Yeah, just money going down the drain. Although I am a fan of Santorum and Huckabee. I would much rather see them on that stage than Jeb Bush, or I don't even know Kasich. How John Kasich is running as a Republican. Not that Republicans are all that great, but he is on the wrong side of the aisle. It would have been great if we could have swapped him out for Joe Webb.
Really? Yeah, and I agree. We need to get Bush and Kasich off of there and put Santorum.
Or Jim Webb, sorry.
Yeah. He got, I think he was the only Democrat that said all lives matter.
And he took a beating for that. And he's a honored military veteran, and he's a supporter of the Second Amendment. And then we have John Kasich, he's a joke.
Yeah, and he's irritating too to watch. I mean, I've heard other people say that, not just me. You just want him to shut up.
He's so arrogant and is flailing at all times, and he really tends to pick a fight with everyone and doesn't have much of a footing to be standing on.
He doesn't have game. So that's in Vegas tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. It's a CNN debate. I think Hugh Hewitt is going to be moderating. So, not that I'm a huge fan of him, but at least there's one Republican moderator. Now, I'm going to play something from the MSNBC debate, which I think was groundbreaking because Cruz and a few others destroyed those moderators, and it kind of pushed them back. So I think it's going to set the tone. All right, I'm going to play that.
Let me say something at the outset. The questions that have been asked so far in this debate illustrate why the American people don't trust the media.
Here's the bottom line. My campaign is going to be about the future of America. It's not going to be about attacking anyone else in the state.
Hold on, Governor. I got a question for Governor Bush. We're moving to Governor Bush. The Republican Party has given in to know-nothingism. Is that why you're having a difficult time in this race?
This is not a cage match. And you look at the questions. Donald Trump, are you a comic book villain?
You had talked a little bit about Marco Rubio. I think you called him Mark Zuckerberg's personal senator because he was in favor of the H-1B.
I never said that.
My apologies. I'm sorry.
He's really doing some bad facts.
Ben Carson, can you do math?
This is a bunch of crap.
John Kasich, will you insult two people over here?
From your colleagues. Who are you talking about?
Marco Rubio, why don't you resign?
So when the Sun Sentinel says you act like you hate your job, do you?
Yeah, let me say, I read that editorial today with a great amusement. It's actually evidence of the bias that exists in the American media today.
But do you hate your job?
Jeb Bush, why have your numbers fallen?
Governor, the fact that you're at the fifth lectern tonight shows how far your stock has fallen in this race, despite the big investment your donors have made.
I've
got a question for Governor Bush.
You want to hear the answer, John?
Senator Paul,
you don't want to hear the answer. You just want to insult.
You used your time on something else.
If anything comes out of this whole thing with some of these nasty and ridiculous questions, I will tell you, you better get rid of the super PACs.
The Democrats have the ultimate super PAC. It's called the mainstream media. Last week, Hillary Clinton went before a committee. She admitted she had sent emails to her family saying, hey, this attack in Benghazi was caused by al-Qaeda-like elements. She spent over a week telling the families of those victims and the American people that it was because of a video. And yet the mainstream media is going around saying it was the greatest week in Hillary Clinton's campaign. It was the week she got exposed as a liar.
And Carl, I'm not finished yet. The contrast with the Democratic debate, where every fawning question from the media was, which of you is more handsome and wise?
This is another example of the double standard that exists in this country between the mainstream media and the conservative media.
Where did I read this and come up with this that you were...
Probably, I don't know, you people write this stuff. I don't know where you...
I wrote this stuff.
So that was the third debate. Dan, we're at the halfway point, so we're going to take a 2-minute break and enjoy a little bit of audio and a pep talk from Sheriff Clark. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
The country that we understood at its founding is under siege. It's under siege by a cabal that would transform us into something other than what the founding fathers wanted for every generation that followed. Our liberty is under siege by people like former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg and his group, Mayors Against the Second Amendment, of which the mayor of Milwaukee, Tom Barrett, proudly proclaims to be a founding member. This group of tyrants wants to disarm us. They want to deny you and me our freedoms guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Keep your hands off our guns, damn it. My fellow patriots, I've had it, and I'm tired of seeing the Second Amendment treated like the bastard child of the Bill of Rights. I'm tired of seeing courts of law and liberal congressional and state legislators contort the meaning of the right to keep and bear arms into a definition so limited that we don't even recognize it. I'm tired of law-abiding citizens like you being viewed by leftist government officials as clingers, bloodthirsty, racists, and extremists. I know you better than that. These people know that the first step toward putting us back into subservience to government is to disarm us, and that's why they fear you, because you possess the means under the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment, to keep government in check. Ladies and gentlemen, the armed citizen made America free, and the armed citizen will keep America free. As a public servant, I took a solemn oath to defend and support the Constitution of the United States and the state in which I reside. Unfortunately, for too many in government service, those are just words. But when I put my hand on the Bible and made that promise to defend freedom, I damn well meant it. All of you have to know that defending freedom is going to be a fight that has no end. And if you're going to stand with me, you can't be afraid to get your knuckles bloody. If you're going to stand with me, you have to be willing to resist any attempt by government to disarm law-abiding people by fighting with the ferociousness of a junkyard dog. Thank you. God bless you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
We need sheriffs like him everywhere. He's on the Blaze now. He does a weekly podcast, and I'm sure you've heard him fill in on Hannity, but he is a great American, and we need more of him.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of David Clark. He really is. He's got a big pair, that's for sure.
Yeah. I've got audio from the fourth debate, and it's about when the illegal immigration came up. It's about a little over a minute. I'm going to play that real quick before we go on.
Senator Cruz, entitlements. You've argued for raising the retirement age and reducing benefits for future retirees. But reducing any sort of benefits for the elderly has always been notoriously hard to do politically. When Speaker Paul Ryan proposed replacing traditional Medicare with federally funded private plans a few years ago, a Liberal group responded with a commercial that featured a granny being pushed off a cliff. What's going to be different this time?
Well, my mom is here, so I don't think we should be pushing any grannies off cliffs. And you misstated what I've said on entitlement reform. What I've said is for seniors, we should make no changes whatsoever. For younger workers, we should gradually raise the retirement age. We should have benefits grow more slowly, and we should allow them to keep a portion of their taxes in a personal account that they control and can pass on to their kids.
I said for future retirees, as you said.
Now, I want to go back to the discussion we had a minute ago because, you know, what was said was right. The Democrats are laughing. Because if Republicans join Democrats as the party of amnesty, we will lose. And, you know, I understand that when the mainstream media covers immigration, it doesn't often see it as an economic issue. But I can tell you for millions of Americans at home watching this, it is a very personal economic issue. And I will say the politics of it would be very, very different if a bunch of lawyers or bankers were crossing the Rio Grande. Or if a bunch of people with journalism degrees were coming over and driving down the wages in the press. Then we would see stories about the economic calamity that is befalling our nation. And I will say, for those of us who believe people ought to come to this country legally and we should enforce the law, we're tired of being told it's anti-immigrant. It's offensive. I am the son of an immigrant who came legally from Cuba to seek the American dream. And we can embrace legal immigrations while believing in the rule of law. And I would note, try going illegally to another country. Try going to China or Japan. Try going to Mexico. See what they do. Every sovereign nation secures its borders, and it is not compassionate to say we're not going to enforce the laws and we're going to drive down the wages for millions of hardworking men and women. That is abandoning the working man.
We go back to Facebook. Dwayne Wesley Cato asks on Facebook, how do we get rid of regulations choking our businesses? Ms. Fiorina, specifically under the President's Affordable Care Act, employers with 50 or more employees are required.
We're back.
I'm gonna go back to the statement about, well, they were talking about immigration, and this. So what? It just drives me insane the way that the left responds to the immigration issue by not differentiating between illegal and legal immigration, not differentiating between the difference when people were coming to this country when there was not a handout welfare system where they could immediately claim $35,000 worth of tax credits, having never paid a dime into the system. But anyways, I think this quote from Kelly Osbourne really sums up the inane response to illegal immigration, and those of us who are against it and who want control of our borders, we get labeled as xenophobic or racist or whatever. So Kelly Osbourne was on The View, and she decided to respond to some of Trump's comments about immigration and sealing the borders. And she said, and I quote, "If you kick every Latino out of this country, then who is going to be cleaning your toilet, Donald Trump?" That perfectly sums up the true racism of the left, the way that they view these immigrants. They view them as cheap labor. They view them as second-class citizens. And those of us who are against mass immigration to the country, that's not why we feel that way. We feel that way because they artificially drive down wages for American citizens. They put American citizens out of jobs because they can come in and undercut them at a much cheaper rate. You hear from employers, let's say, Joe Farmer or somebody running let's say a construction company, and they'll say these guys will work 10 or 12 hours. Guys from south of the border that come up here and work 10, 12, 14 hours. they'll take a lower pay rate than Americans will, and that's just putting Americans out of work. Maybe they are harder workers. That's very possible, but that's not we shouldn't be suffering the consequences for that, and we clearly are, because there are over 100 million working age Americans who are unemployed.
Right. And it's not rocket science to differentiate between legal and illegal immigration. It's belligerence on their part. They know what the difference is. They don't want to acknowledge it because it destroys their angle, their narrative. And if I have to hear about the Statue of Liberty one more time, this week, give me your poor huddled masses, that sort of thing, which is a great, at the time, coming through Ellis Island, Italian, Irish immigrants, or whoever from Europe coming for the American dream. They weren't coming over here, like you said, to get on the soil and sign up for the welfare rolls. We're in a welfare state now. It doesn't apply anymore. The whole world would flood into this country if they could. I mean,
absolutely. And the third world that is coming here is growing at such a faster pace in terms of their population than the amounts that are coming into the country. So bringing them into this country, bringing this country down from an economic perspective, does absolutely nothing for the third world, because it makes us less capable of helping them from a humanitarian point of view from the outside, and it also doesn't even put a dent into their population.
Right. And along with the influx, whether it's like the summer before last summer, from the southern border, which wasn't even really from Mexico, it was from further south. Now, we're getting, there's signs in some, I believe, some Chinese language. I don't know if it's Mandarin, but there's signs in that language. We have Syrians that take on a Latino name, and they come in with a fake passport, and now we have ISIS in every state, and we have them, like we heard the other day, the cell phones and the propane tanks.
Right, down in Missouri right now, there is definitely a concern about national security. At the moment, the FBI is investigating this, but a few days ago, a bunch of different propane tanks, like the ones you would see outside of gas stations where it's a locker and maybe there's 15 or 20 propane tanks in there for rental or purchase, those were going missing in the middle of the night. Entire lockers were being stolen. So there were multiple incidences of propane tanks going missing, and then also Arabic men in the middle of the night going into 24-hour Walmarts and buying 50 to 60 prepaid cell phones per pop, which sets off some alarm bells for sure, and they did it in multiple locations around the state. So right now, FBI is investigating that, and there is a concern that there is some sort of plot in the works. I've seen some of the photos of these guys loading massive amounts of propane tanks into the back of their trucks, in addition to the ones that they're stealing. And it's definitely something that we should be keeping an eye on.
Oh, yeah. And keeping an eye on, it's... Maybe they should start checking social media. What in San Bernardino, it was a complete failure, and I put it all on the president. I believe it's his failure. He does not listen to intelligence reports. He's petulant. He does not have the will. I believe he does not want to keep us safe, and I believe that event, that terrorist attack in California, he immediately took his failure, which that was, and he used it to his advantage to strip us of more individual liberty by calling out for tougher gun laws. And that's just typical of him. Never let a crisis go to waste. But the ironic thing is that he's doing this all on events that I believe he is responsible for. He has shown so many times that he sympathizes with well, the Muslim Brotherhood, he has them in his administration. We have a few dozen that I've read in the cabinet and in high positions, whether it's a Homeland Security advisor or these are unelected officials that clearly do not have America's best interest at heart, at hand. They will say on social media flat out that, and it's just he I've got off on kind of a thing here, but he just, before the Paris attack, it was pathetic that he said ISIS is contained. It was just an example of how he's completely trying to BS us constantly. I don't think he has a clue. I think people say he's dumb, then people say he's evil. I think it's a combination. I got this audio right around the time, and the first part of it is from Paris, and then the second part is from a town hall in New Hampshire, back in June, and it compares, you hear what Obama says about ISIS, and then you hear what Ted Cruz says about ISIS.
You're tuned in to Rebooting Liberty.
We were inside the stadium, and approximately half an hour after the beginning of the game, we heard two big explosions.
Well, I don't think they're gaining strength. What is true is that we have contained them. They have not gained ground.
Police are just storming a concert hall. We don't know the exact number. It could be 100, more, less, being held hostage.
We have contained them.
Is unwilling to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism.
In Syria, they'll come in, they'll leave.
Right now we have a photo op foreign policy. Drop a bomb here, a missile there. You know, the radicals say they reject modernity. Great. We need to send them back to the Stone Age. How do you do that? You have a commander-in-chief that lays out a clear objective. We are not going to weaken. We are not going to degrade. We are not going to pinprick ISIS. We are going to destroy them. We are going to make, if you join ISIS, you are signing your death certificate.
And we're back.
Yeah, you know, that's a perfect example of the contrast between a real man and an ideologue. You know, to go back to what you said about Obama being partially dumb and partially evil, I completely agree with you. I think we have somebody on our hands here that is a puppet on strings. And some of those strings are being controlled by marionettes like George Soros or Valerie Jarrett, you know, David Axelrod, and the list goes on and on and on. They're the minds behind the Obama farce that we have. So I think he's absolutely in line with them and a total pure ideologue who has been bathed in communism, communist rhetoric, Marxist rhetoric, Islamism. He went to school at a madrasa. There's evidence that he went as an adult to Pakistan for a year to soak up the Islamic culture there. So he's a combination of all of the worst ideologies. And so he's a very willing participant, but I also think that he is a dumb man, because when you hear him speak without a teleprompter, he can't get through 2 or 3 words without a pause or an ah. And so he's balancing a lack of intellect with also having to run through all the lies that he has told and try not to trip up too badly, which he's also notorious for doing. And if there was any justice in the mainstream media, they'd be calling him out on his lies on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that. That guy is helpless without a teleprompter. And when the teleprompter breaks, I like to see they capture him kicking the podium over or slamming the door. I love seeing him get pissed off.
Oh, yeah. His only his only tool is gone, and then he can't relate to people. He's on a different planet. The only people who he could possibly have a conversation with are people who think like him or are telling him what to do.
And we're to the end of our broadcast.
And a great first broadcast it was. Nice to do it with you, Jared. Again, my name is Dan Lyman. You can find me on Twitter at Citizen Analyst or Facebook at Citizen Analyst. And I also write for the Western Free Press, westernfreepress.com, and you can find my columns there. Have a great week.
Glad you joined us. Hope you'll tune in next week. While the maximum hour of danger is approaching for our nation's remaining liberty, we must stand together and reboot liberty. Godspeed, patriots. Stay vigilant.
You're tuned in to Rebooting Liberty.
Hey, liberals, why don't you try rooting for your own damn country for a change?